Some years ago, an experiment was conducted with chickens that were kept in a cage for half a year and then one day laid out on the beautiful green grass where the sun was shining and the birds were singing. What do you think happens? Well, surely they decided to leave the chicken cage, right? Only to return after 30 seconds. I call this the chicken cage syndrome, the fear of change, or rather, the fear of the unknown. So how do you get the chickens out of the cage and how do you make them stay out for good? You'll find out right now. Hey everyone, welcome to all our viewers across the world, our World Business Forum audience, and all our Chief Executive Magazine readers. I'm Martin Lindstrom, your co-host, along with my dear friend and the world's #1 leadership coach, Marshall Goldsmith. Now, Marshall is a member of the Thinkers 50 Hall of Fame and has written some of the most iconic books out there, like What Got You Here Won't Get You There and Mojo, How to Get It. But beside all those fancy credentials, I think more importantly, Marshall is just super unique. He's unique because he has an ability to connect with people and really make them feel special while also telling them a message which is important. I mean, I so much have to learn from Marshall on that one. So listen, Marshall, once again, I'm so glad that you're still hanging into this show.
Well, let me say I am so honored to be here with my wonderful friend, Martin. Martin is so many accolades, one of the 100 most influential people in the world in Time magazine. He is author of some spectacular books, including things like Biology and the Ministry of Common Sense. And you know what else? a good guy. Also, though, I think Martin is the most interesting human being I've ever met. He's had a fascinating life. You just read about the guy. I love his life. I love what he's doing. World's expert on branding, #1, Martin.
Thank you, Marshall. I mean, I'd have to blush ongoing here with all this stuff you're saying, but I have to tell you one thing. I think with the 2 guests we have on this show, once again, I'm going to let you down, right? Anyway, if you like this show, don't forget to press the like button or the follow button or the subscribe button. Now, I have to tell you one little thing. Today's show is all about chickens, or rather, we'll use a lot of metaphors using chickens. Now, one of our guests will reveal why. So, how do you get those chickens out of that cage I mentioned for you? Well, let's visit those chickens stuck in that cage for a second. Now, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring on a little bit of an illustration on my screen right now. I'm just doing a drawing of 4 chicken cages seen from the top, all surrounding a little square. Now, this is what I've learned over the years working with companies around the world. I'm going to be very nice to those chickens. I'll open the cage so they can go out in the beautiful green grass. Now, here's my question for all of you guys watching. Where would you place the corn in case you want to have these chickens leaving the cage? On your keyboard right now, share with me, where would you place the corn? Because this is an extraordinary important question. The issue is that most people, I think Tom from Hickory right now is suggesting in the middle. Let's just try that for some. So Tom, this is in the middle. What is going to happen then? Well, if you take a look at chicken A, chicken B, and chicken C and D, well, what are they going to do? First of all, they'll look at that corn in the middle, and gosh, that's far away. My KPIs are not supporting it. And even worse, what if my manager, the crazy manager I have coming up with all those ideas, is being fired? I'll look like an idiot. So what is chicken A going to do, Tom? Well, he's going to look, or she is going to look at B, chicken B, and basically just say, listen, what is chicken B doing? Chicken B will look at chicken C and chicken C and chicken D, and everyone will look at everyone. And what will they conclude? Let me go straight back into the cage again. This is really what I call the chicken cage syndrome. Because here's the issue. One thing I've learned is to break this down into what we call 90-day interventions, short-term conclusions. So instead of pressing that little corn down in the middle, place it just outside the chicken cage. Short enough distance for the chickens to grab it, feel an instant gratification, celebrate a success within the company. So everyone else can see, wow, if I change, in fact, the whole company will change. And then you can place another piece of corn getting closer and closer to the center of where you really want to go. Now, that's the 90-day interventions. And that's what we're going to talk a lot about all these many minutes from now, because having tried this approach hundreds of times, I can tell you one thing, it works. But why does it work? On today's show, we have 2 guests, which will tell you much more about what chicken teaches us about psychology, safety, psychological safety, teamwork, and talent. Marshall, tell us more about our first guest.
Our first guest is Margaretheffernan, a wonderful person with a refreshing personality. In a sea of boring academics, she is certainly not boring. She has been the CEO of 5 companies. She's an author of 6 big books, and she worked for 13 years with the BBC. She's been ranked as a top 100 media executive. I love her concept of willful blindness, which I just see so much in the real world. It's so refreshing to hear her talk about it. She's also had 8 million TED views, among other things. And one of her most famous TED shows is about super chicken. So, Martin, we are so lucky to have Margaret with us today.
We are welcome, Margaret. Listen, I'm just thinking about Margaret, before we sort of introduce you to the world of chickens, why don't we just play a video where you talk about chickens? It's much easier, right?
Evolutionary biologist at Purdue University named William Muir studied chickens. He was interested in productivity. I think it's something that concerns all of us. But it's easy to measure in chickens because you just count the eggs. He wanted to know what could make his chickens more productive, so he devised a beautiful experiment. Chickens live in groups, so first of all, he selected just an average flock, and he let it alone for 6 generations. But then he created a second group of the individually most productive chickens. You could call them super chickens. And he put them together in a super flock. And each generation, he selected only the most productive for breeding. After 6 generations had passed, what did he find? Well, the first group, the average group, was doing just fine. They were all plump and fully feathered, and egg production had increased dramatically. What about the second group? Well, all but 3 were dead. They'd pecked the rest to death.
I love that. So, Margaret, what is the solution to the super chicken dilemma?
Well, the solution to the super chicken dilemma lies in what happened to the average flock, which is the average flock did very, very well. And I think, the moral of the story is that a lot of so-called management thinkers with a very, very loose understanding of Darwin used to think, well, if you create conditions in which everybody has to compete fiercely, then the best will rise to the top and you'll get this phenomenal productivity. And of course, what we've discovered over time is exactly what the super chicken experiment shows you, which is actually what happens is they just all kill each other. And we see this in corporate politics all the time. You see it in teams undermining other teams when they're both doing pitches. I mean, I think, every time I tell that story, I get this kind of horrible laughter of recognition from the audience because they all know who the super chickens in their organizations are.
Now, Margaret, I just want to build on one topic because, of course, the super chicken concept also comes back to creating powerful cultures, right? And I know you, just like me, have a really ambivalent relationship to technology, which I think a lot of people claims it is here to change and improve culture. I have a nagging feeling of that you kind of the opposite opinion about this topic. Share with me what the role of technology is, how it is, I think, destroying culture, and how you navigate this right now.
So I'll just tell you one story about a company I worked with, which, we'd done a lot of strategy work. We'd kind of worked on the product offering. We looked at the market. We looked at, the sales process, all of that sort of stuff. And there was only one thing left to talk about, which was people. And the CEO said to me, well, we've got our engagement data and it shows that it's going up. And I said, well, from what to what? He said, well, from 59 to 62%. And so what does that mean? It may just mean all the people who hated working here have left. And the point is that because he was relying on technology to poll his people and do the survey and monitor the people and see, who was staying late and who was working hard, he was completely depending on technology for his communication and his sense of how the organization was functioning. The consequence of that was he didn't know anything about what was going on in his organization. He didn't know why the numbers had moved. He didn't know if it meant anything. And after we kind of made that clear, he said, well, then how would I know? And I left this pregnant pause for as long as I could, thinking, oh, come on, this is so obvious. And finally, I broke the news to him that the way he would find out would be if he actually talked to people. And there was this kind of stunned silence. And I think, as we're all so busy emailing and texting and, doing all this stuff and Zooming and we have kind of forgotten that in the face-to-face moment of talking to somebody and getting to know them over time and building trust and developing generosity and reciprocity and starting to know people as people, not just, places on the org chart or just titles. If you really know people, then you start really to understand and to get great, rich communication about them, about the environment, about the culture, complex information of a kind that technology dumbs down so that it has a kind of simple authority, which is totally misleading. And it's very well understood in technology. And bear in mind, I used to work in technology. right? That when we use devices, we're essentially outsourcing to a machine what we used to do ourselves. Now, if I think of my smartphone, I don't know my kids' phone numbers, but I'm okay. I'm very fine with outsourcing all those numbers I used to have to keep in my head. I'm not comfortable outsourcing my capacity to have a human conversation with somebody. I'm not comfortable learning to shout at Alexa and forgetting how to talk confidentially to a human being. So there's always a trade-off in the way that we use tech, and we have to think about at what point is it a good trade-off? Happy not to have a head full of phone numbers. At what point is it a bad trade-off? Very unhappy if I can't have a meaningful conversation with someone whom I know well because I've been talking this way for a long time.
You know, a couple of reflections. I remember I did a session when I had feedback on all these people in this company, and it was a huge company and allegedly supposed to be successful. 11 of these people ended up being CEOs. They were like mega gods. While they all worked together, they were awful. Teamwork was zero. The company was losing money. It was a pretty famous example. It was so hilarious because they all ended up being really pretty good CEOs on their own, but they just couldn't get together at all. They reminded me a bunch of super chickens. I never thought about that concept, but it seems so real. You know, another thing, I love your concept of willful blindness. I think it has been important in the past, but it's going to be much more important in the future. Can you just talk about why it matters so much?
Yeah, so willful blindness is a legal term. The law says that if there's knowledge that you could have had and should have had and somehow managed not to have, then you're deemed to be willfully blind because you had an opportunity for knowledge that you shirked, and you're responsible for the consequences. And I first encountered this when I was writing 2 plays for the BBC about the collapse of Enron. And I read the transcript of the trial of the chairman and chief executive. And the judge, in his summing up, cited this idea. And it was like a kind of magnet dropped into all the iron filings in my brain. You know, everything I'd ever read, thought, and seen kind of cohered around this idea. I thought about organizations, you know, that were staring the future in the face and couldn't see it. You know, on the day that Netscape went public, Microsoft didn't have a browser in development. You know, when Facebook was growing by leaps and bounds, Google had no social networking offer at all. All these companies packed full of super smart people who could see things, somehow didn't see things. And I thought about other things, you know, obviously the financial crisis, the crisis in the Catholic Church. I mean, I can go on and on and on. And, you know, one reason I keep issuing new editions of the book is because the examples just are there over and over and over again. And I think it poses a very profound leadership question, which is, how is it in organizations that people who are smart and do have knowledge and do have goodwill somehow manage not to see what's obvious? And some of it is about obedience and conformity.